Go.
For RCR Wireless News, I'm Sean Kinney, and I'm joined by a great panel today of journalists who work with me, Kelly Hill, James Blackman, and then some of our esteemed analyst colleagues, Monica Paolini with Senza, Fili, Leonard Lee with NextCurve, and Dean Bubley with Disruptive Analysis. Welcome, everybody.
Hey, thanks for having us.
So we are, about 3 weeks out from Mobile World Congress. James, Kelly, and I have long lists of interviews that we need to transcribe, write up, and add some sort of context to. Some of it will happen, some of it will not. You all, in varying degrees, attended the show, Dean. You can maybe give us some color on that later, but there was a lot to unpack. This was a well-attended Mobile World Congress. We had 101,000 people there per the GSMA. The show was as lively as I remember it, being kind of pre-COVID days. So, I mean, all in all, good show. Lot of hype around a lot of different subjects. So maybe we can kind of start at the obvious place to start, which is AI for telecoms. There was AI branding on every stand that I walked past, essentially. Some of it I understood, some of it, like at the MediaTek stand, said AI hyphen metaverse. I do not know what that means. I'm maybe not a very good journalist because I did not inquire as to what that means. Don't really care what that means, but there was, I think, maybe to just start us off, I'd like to get some general impressions from you, but I guess to me, we're at the midpoint of 5G. We have not seen very effective monetization of the network. So now the focus shifts a little bit to like OpEx and TCO. So now AI is your silver bullet for automating what can be automated and ripping costs out of your operation. That was, my reductive impression at least. But I mean, Leonard, give me some takes here. You're, I think, at GTC. So, you're embedded in AI there at NVIDIA's show, but just, what was the take?
Yeah. Well, I mean, when do we not have hype? And I think that's one of the problems. I think the industry, especially the organizers of Mobile World Congress, have a really challenging time just doing a retrospective on what's happening in the industry and dealing with this, what I call a technology digestion issue. I mean, we have so many hyped technologies stacked into the queue that operators themselves are having a really difficult time, and consumers, quite frankly, are having a difficult time just making sense of all of this. I mean, what was it, last year or a year before we had metaverse? I mean, what did that turn out to become? Not much, right? And, to your point, AI metaverse or Gen AI metaverse, I think you've developed a pretty good filter, because I think those are exactly the things that you can just walk right by and ignore. But in terms of AI, I was really surprised at how muted, quite frankly, generative AI was at the conference this year. I thought it was just going to be chatbot, Gen AI. Hey, we front ended it with Llama 2 and Claude XYZ, but it was actually a bit subdued compared to what I initially thought going in. But it does highlight, number one, that AI in general is difficult. Generative AI is going to be really difficult. And a lot of these things are, I think, don't have a path to monetization. I think it's clearly evident, as a lot of the ISVs present didn't necessarily put out their, subscription pricing or what have you. I think a lot of them are finding out that they can't charge for this stuff. It's just, it's just an incremental advancement in their the technology sets that they have to play with. And so, anyway. I'll stop there so other folks can share their
reminder.
I disagree a little bit on that. Yeah. Because I actually was completely floored by how much Gen AI there was out there. And what I mean by that is that everybody was talking about AI, but there was this confusion and complete misinformation in some cases of Gen AI being the most advanced part. I mean, the new AI. So there is traditional AI, and then there is Gen AI, which is like the 6G of the thing. And I think that that's really like really confusing, and just so the people don't know. But then when you go beyond the stand front and you go and talk to people, the people that really work on it, they really understand the challenges. But the message, the PowerPoint message, it's really not. It's just like confusing beyond belief. And maybe I'm a little bit biased because I'm writing a report on this, so I was just trying to go and dig down. But that's now. The other thing is that, yes, if you look at it at AI and Gen AI specifically as a way to monetize anything, I just think that that's not really, it's the same thing with AI. If you, sorry, 5G. If you look at 5G as a way to monetize things, well, that's just a failure. So I think I see AI and Gen AI as a way to increase efficiency. So it is monetization in the sense that you become more efficient and you spend less. But can you charge people because of AI or because of 5G? It just doesn't work quite that way. You need to kind of have, I think, a different approach to monetization. So that's one thing. But the Gen AI, I mean, the amount of confusion, misinformation, I thought was staggering.
And I thought that one of the more interesting things that I heard about AI from MWC, and bear in mind, I wasn't actually on the show floor. I was in Barcelona, but I made a point of not actually being at the show itself. But I watched some of the keynotes, and I thought that Tim Hodges, the CEO of Deutsche Telekom, had a really good presentation about AI, where he actually appeared to, certainly been very well briefed on the different touch points, and certainly made a distinction between Gen AI and machine learning for network optimization and so on. That said, he then sort of went a step further and asserted that we'd all have AI-powered devices, the sort of like the voice-activated ones, and that would replace smartphones and apps within. Well, particularly, he said that apps are dead, and we'll use an AI-powered UI on our phones within 5 years. And I quite like to make a bet on that, because I think my view is he's going to lose what I call the battle of the Tims versus Mr. Cook. I think that to me exemplified the sort of overhype that Leonard was talking about. I think there's some really important stuff around AI that came out, not just at the show, but generally. Today I'm at a fiber event in Berlin, and as I came off the train, there's an advert for Microsoft for sort of AI-powered fiber networks, whether that's for the network itself or for customer service. So it's clearly a theme. But I think that I agree with Monica that when you drill into the details, there's some really interesting stuff that's going in the guts of, say, 6G developments, of, I don't know, future MIMO radios that are going to be AI powered, and network optimization, whether that's in terms of energy or coverage, or creating dynamic modulation schemes, or all this clever stuff. But I'm not so sure beyond the sort of customer service chatbots that Gen AI is going to be, and also actually for coding for the software developers, both in the vendors and in the operators. But beyond that, I think that Gen AI, it's obviously the hot topic, but I think that was overstated, and some of the other stuff was understated.
Yeah. You got anything? I know you wrote a few kind of AI feature type stories from the show.
Who are you pointing at?
Kelly.
Okay, yeah. So I see a bit of a dichotomy, and yes, I think Gen AI came up in a lot of conversations, but I agree that people don't really know how to use it beyond, it wasn't really designed for a commercial purpose, and I think that's sort of evident in the ways that people are thinking of to use it. Yes, coding, yes, sort of language-based things, but some of the interesting things that I heard people talking about in terms of AI, yes, the radio interface or the air interface for 6G, and that idea of being able to put AI to work there in channel detection, so that you're getting more real time and some heavier duty processing as well, to get more instantaneous sense of what the radio channel looks like, so that you can be more efficient in how you use it. That's an application that people are working on, that people fully expect to go into the standards. And so that seems like it's something that's likely to bear at least some fruit. Now, when you start getting into things like that, though, I think it's always a reality check to think about how often they actually can be of use in the radio environment that is more and more complex. Sometimes you just don't get very clear channels, and a clean radio environment is harder and harder to come by. So, but as I've talked to people, the point that I hear repeatedly is that, even if you can get some of these things only working a certain percentage of the time, it still ends up being worth it for operators in terms of either increased efficiency or, better user experience for at least some people some of the time. And then the other thing, I will say that my favorite AI demo was something called RAN-GPT. It was from a company called IRA Technologies. It was in the VMware Broadcom booth. They were relying on network emulation from Viavi Solutions. And I liked it because it was one of the few places where I've actually seen real concrete evidence of guardrails for AI, which sort of got some lip service and some discussion. But people also seem to just sort of be turning these things loose and worrying about the implications later. But basically, this RAN-GPT tool was both sort of an analysis and control element for the RAN. You could tell it, I'd like to see a visual graph of, the power consumption at this half a dozen sites in this geographic area. And the first thing that it would do was tell you, okay, this is a non-harmful query, therefore I can answer it. So right up front, you see it sort of looking at what you're asking it to do and going, okay, this isn't going to cause any problems. Then now let's do what you're telling me to do. And then it pops up, there's the screen is sort of split. And so it not only, shows you the ultimate result of what you're asking for, but it shows you all of its work so that as a network engineer, you can go scroll back up and say, okay, oh, wait, I asked for this site, not this other site. You can essentially go back and look at what it's producing and how it is calculating all of these things so that you can, you're not just typing in something and then you have no idea how it thinks. And I thought that was pretty cool.
James, you told me not to ask you any telco questions, so feel free to pass. But did you hear anything interesting that maybe touched on private network space that had something to do with AI, or just?
Yeah, I think it was on the stands and stuff, but I just didn't spend much time on the stands, and so my impression of AI at that show was probably those were kind of stickers put on quite last minute in lots of cases on the stands, and then in the conversations behind the scenes, it hardly came up. It was not really, boots on the ground type of technology. And I think, having said that, there was, the metaverse, I think in the industrial spaces, I think Siemens is pushing it hard and is not, I know it's a trendy term, and, I really hated it when it came out, but I think they're bundling stuff together in a way, digital twins and some AI chatbots on the, around a factory. Nokia's doing bits and pieces. It's got a proof, and it is interesting. I think there's, but it is chatbot stuff, and it is, how you kind of ease the load for the workers on the ground. And I think, but the other thing about it is, it's very clear how nascent it is and how many issues there are with this hallucination and this kind of stuff and the kind of weird stuff that their proofs are throwing up. And I think, I don't know what they're talking, 12 months out, maybe in some cases for kind of enterprise applications to run Gen I type technologies. But yeah, so my sense is, I feel like from a journalistic point of view, I can kind of talk around it a bit, but essentially park it in terms of what's real and what's going into factories and enterprises at the moment.
So James, that actually sparks one other thing for me. So, and I think this was a conversation that I had with IBM in terms of generative AI use cases for telecom. And this one I actually thought was very interesting. And it was sort of, okay, you could feed every user manual that a network engineer needs into an AI model. And so all of your network engineers all of a sudden have some place to go as a basis for all of these different things from all the different network manufacturers or software folks. And, you know, all of that documentation could be used in a large language model so that you have a place to start with queries, you know, for troubleshooting or just, you know, maintenance and operations. That actually sounded like something that would be.
That's the essence of what this proof that Nokia's put out. It was demoing. That is more or less what Siemens is doing. It's got a predictive maintenance thing, you know, but that is exactly it. That strikes me as something which is practical and is valuable potentially. And I think if you can map in your you know, your directory of queries and how it's got to the bottom of this information, then a seasoned engineer on the shop floor can go, you know, can second guess it and go, I'm not quite sure about that. Let me see you're working. And if those guardrails are in place, all of that can come together. But I do think at the moment, I know that they're, you know, I mean, I do think there's some strange stuff coming out of these Gen AI programs at the moment. And I think rather like 5G, no industrial enterprise is going to let it anywhere near its production system, you know, which is even if it's presented as a critical piece of technology, there is such paranoia in lots of industry, and I think for a time yet, it's going to be around the edge of the factory, you know.
Yeah. And I think you're making a good point. I think one of the biggest challenges with generative AI and even AI in general is making it telco grade or carrier grade, enterprise grade, and in many instances, you know, you can argue consumer grade. And so, you know, these are the challenges that a lot of these vendors face right now is how do we take that shiny object and actually polish it into something that's reliable? And, you know, quite frankly, there were a number of analysts, myself included, that were able to make these things hallucinate like crazy. It doesn't matter whether or not you're using RAG or fine tuning. It's an inherent issue with the technology. And I think that's maybe the big discovery. And even through early POCs, and let's say maybe even coming up with these demos, this is something that maybe a lot of companies have become nervous about. And that's one of the reasons why I said, hey, look, I didn't see as many people going around saying, hey, we're going to throw this into production. We have customers that are using it. Nobody was saying that. They always, you know, frame things as, hey, this is a demo, or, you know, this is R&D, or we have maybe a couple of people piloting it. But I think folks are generally wary about suggesting that this thing was, whatever they had was X grade, right? So.
And I think the hype around AI, you know, I think the industry, in conversation anyway, is treating it with some caution, unlike private networks, unlike IoT, which are kind of known quantities a little bit. But I think there is, you know, probably quite correctly, a kind of underlying fear.
Yeah, well, there's evidence that it doesn't work, right? I mean, we get reminded of it almost every single time we use these tools, that it just doesn't work.
May I take it back? I mean, it's not that it doesn't work. It's actually working the way it's supposed to. So we should not try to have something like Gen AI to do something that is not designed to do. So if you want to do automation, if you want to have, you know, the career grade kind of thing that you're talking about, which is really crucial, Gen AI is not the thing for it. It's not a technology that was developed for it, and it cannot do, because it just takes whatever information is out there and, you know, digests it in a very efficient way. But, you know, it just takes whatever is out there. So it's not going to create anything any better than what's out there. And the hallucination is kind of part of the fact that the data is in itself noisy, and it is what it is. So there's bias out there, bias in and bias comes out. So we should not really expect it. So if you want to get, you know, fit in all the manuals, if the manuals are good, then you're going to get good outcome. But if the manuals are a mess, it's still going to be a mess coming out, because you cannot fix it. Now, this is completely different from AI and ML. which are a way to really look at it. It's a completely different thing. It's a really a much more general thing. So there you could expect to have, you know, career grade, and we already have it to some extent. I mean, obviously we're all learning, and it's just like, you know, we had AI lab for decades, right? And it's really hard stuff, and it's going to change, and it's changing things, but it's not Gen AI. And so my whole thing is on the hype is that a lot of people think that Gen AI is going to go and automate the network. No, you don't want to do that, because that's not a technology designed for that. It's a very simple thing. So yeah, something that hallucinates, you don't want to be deciding your MIMO parameters. Well, hey,
Yeah.
I mean, you see what I'm saying? Like, but there is this kind of like, you put a chat GPT model, and then all of a sudden, you know, that to me, that's where the hype is coming from.
I mean, I'd love to see what the customer side of this is going to be. I want to be able to ask ChatGPT, what should I say to the customer service agent to get the best discount on the renewal rate? So, yeah, you could always imagine.
Be any different than talking to the human, because sometimes I have the opposite feeling that I don't know. I mean,
no, that's a prompt for me to talk to a human. Or maybe I empower Siri to go and negotiate on my behalf and say, hey, emulate my voice and get the best renewal deal you can on my mobile subscription. Yeah,
well, but I think
way off.
That's a really interesting point, though, because ultimately AI, and particularly Gen AI, is not human proof. It's not. It's meant to take whatever humans put in, and they may be wrong, they may be malicious, they may be just messing around. And, you know, and in one conversation I had during MWC, it was like, you know, you get a new network engineer in, and if he's inputting, you know, different data that is at a different level, maybe it's not as detailed as the stuff that it was initially trained on, all of a sudden, you know, your model is getting thrown way off. And who's watching, you know, how long does it take to figure out when your model has gone off the rails? Because how do you even know? And people don't know. People don't know.
Engineering on, and in fact, I was talking to Tarek Amina now at Aramco Digital, and what they're doing is actually they're building sort of like the other half of the thing. So you get Gen AI to spit out whatever, right? And then you need someone to actually use that data and make sure it's all okay. So they're building the other end, because you need to make sure, you know, as I say, the question is that you kind of get access to all this data, excellent, but how do you know that what comes out is good? So they actually look at, this is not in telecom, but for, you know, to screen job applications, that's perfect, right? You get the model to do it. Well, it turns out the model is more biased than humans. Well, why is it so? Because the bias is out there in the data. So you can't do any better than what the data is. And if the data is bad, then yeah, same thing, right?
All right. Well, I'm going to change subjects a little bit. Dean, you and Philippe are having an interesting exchange in the Q&A, and you kind of teed up network APIs there, which this was very important at Mobile World Congress. GSMA really wanted us to take something away here about network APIs. So just briefly on context, I mean, one, this was 1 year after the launch of Open Gateway Initiative at Mobile World Congress 2022, or I'm sorry, 23. So there was need to show progress. So we saw a bunch of announcements from operators ahead of the show all around APIs. Next, I would say McKinsey put out an interesting piece of research that I'm going to screen share momentarily, but APIs for 5G monetization, that was kind of the message. We have a surprise guest joining us. This is Philippe Pagniati from Qualcomm, who is the 5G evangelist and VP of Business Development. So before we pivot into network APIs, let's just maybe, Dean, you can carry on that conversation that was taking place in the Q&A here for everyone. Monetization of Gen AI, what Korean operators are doing to kind of test this in-house and then productize it.
I mean, I think actually, possibly Philippe and I were actually agreeing, even though we seem to be disagreeing. My belief on sort of AI, and also for that matter on APIs, is that operators should sort of very much eat their own dog food and be using stuff internally, and also with their partners, and then if you like customers are the sort of third tier, on the basis that if an operator isn't seen to be using these capabilities in-house, doesn't appear to trust them to run its own operations, why would anyone else trust them to run theirs and buy it as a service? And whether that's a network API or whether that's an AI capability that they're hosting, I definitely think the sort of internal references and case studies are going to be quite powerful. Is Philippe on to speak to cover this now? Or?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah,
yep.
I'm appearing under the name of Sean, so maybe another my second name. I don't know. I don't know what I typed initially to enter. Thank you for having me as a surprise guest, Sean. Yeah, it won't be long. What I meant is exactly what Dean means. It's exactly eat their own food before they go and sell it to the B2B customers. So imagine that you are seeing as an operator a great feedback from having a Gen AI customer care service, like everybody's talking about the customer care service. But the difficulty, so what they try to address, both SKT and KT in Korea, is to try to expose what is that they have done well, what they are doing well. So I agree with Dean, it's not ready yet commercially speaking, but their intention when they launched their AI A. for SKT and Medium, very complex name for Korea Telecom for KT, then they showed that they want to expose those capabilities, Gen AI capabilities, to B2B customers. So customer care comes as an example, but what they do in their shops also would probably be prone to be sold to B2B customers. So I was intrigued to. For me, this is monetization, like it would be a two-layer, like you would sell the infrastructure, the 5G private, which I agree with some of the comments may not happen anytime soon, but you would sell the private networks infrastructure and maybe some of the services to the B2B customers that you are selling to with these additional Gen AI backed up services.
Right. Let's do network APIs just for the purposes of time management. We're at about the halfway mark here. So yeah, like I said, one API, that was the theme of Mobile World Congress in 2009.
2009?
Interpret that how you will.
Yeah.
And here's my McKinsey slide that we looked at before we got on live here. And just to qualify this, we're, no one's here to make fun of McKinsey or to otherwise undercut what's here. But I mean, 100 billion to 300 billion over the next 5 to 7 years from network APIs. All the meetings I had that were around network APIs, particularly group sessions, there was always protracted conversation around the revenue share model and who gets what. And so, that's a lot of API calls that add up to $100 billion. Just open this up to the floor. I mean, what do you think about this? Is this what 5G monetization has been lacking? Is exposure of the network to third-party developers? Is this overly optimistic? What is this?
Yeah, I've been having a to and fro with some of the McKinsey folk on LinkedIn on this, and to be fair, they're saying it's like 10 to 30 billion from the APIs themselves, and 10x that it pulls through in, I guess, solution services, things like that. I think that's overcooked. I think there's two separate categories of APIs here. One is what I'll call Twilio envy, which is the sort of CPaaS type APIs. Which is it came out of sort of SMS and voice APIs and sort of sending your two-factor authentication and sending your SMS reminder for I don't know, your doctor's appointment or something like that, which is all fair enough. And historically, there's Twilio and a long list of other CPaaS providers that do that, but telcos generally haven't made much headway with a few exceptions. I think Deutsche Telekom has had about 3 attempts at that in the past. So there's an argument here for the operators to use the Kamara APIs and things like Open Gateway to try and retail that type of solution to medium and long tail developers. Some of that stuff like fraud management has the number, has the SIM been swapped on your phone. It's not really a network API, and all that is I'll call it worthy but dull. And I don't think it's worth 100 to 300 billion. And there's a bunch of people who do it already. And if the telcos can compete in that more effectively by acting together, fine. But then there's the real 5G related network APIs, which is all this stuff on quality on demand and, I don't know, edge computing as a service, and can we sell a turbo button and all this sort of jazz. And my view is that's massively overestimated. I think there's certain areas where that has potential legs, but they're in places where the network is really, really well engineered. So you can imagine in an enterprise site or maybe a big sport, actually dimensioned properly and everyone's got appropriate connectivity, that you could, I don't know, let's say you have the guaranteed quality of service to watch the Formula One from a different vantage point, from a drone above the car, or the replays in the sports stadium, and the network's been set up for that event, so it works. And they do a partnership with the FIA or the Football League or whatever it is. But if it's going to be the general purpose one, I really have a lot of doubts, and I really don't think that people will sit at home and hit the turbo button for their gaming session, once a day, once a week. So I think that side of it, I have real doubts of. And arguably, it's going to be more important for the fixed network than it is for the mobile network as well, because at least a fixed network, your house doesn't move. Whereas, if you're one day you're outside, the next day you're in a basement, the third day you're roaming, trying to provide an API that covers all operating networks in all situations without having a contract which is like asterisk, sorry, your turbo button won't work if you're on the train or in the car or in the basement or in a concrete building. No one's going to pay extra for that. Whereas at least on the fixed network, maybe that's got a chance.
I saw the fraud detection demo 3 different stands, I think, and as like I think I already have this with Bank of America, so I don't really understand what the pitch is exactly, and I'm certainly not going to pay for it. But Leonard, what do you got?
No, I mean, I think one of the challenges or issues with the network API market discussion is, why are we talking about APIs? The only thing that APIs are really doing are providing you with an interface to a service. If you don't have the underlying service, you have nothing. And I think that's been the challenge as you listen to what folks are talking about on stage at Mobile World Congress. And they tend to be kind of these grandiose visions of what these APIs can do and what they suggest. And, I think, Dean, you're spot on. There are 2 categories of this. You have some of these functional things that you just mentioned, Sean, which are, the fraud detection and the eSIM stuff. But then there's the more important, I think, question of, well, what about the other stuff, which is the network related? And so, Dean, you brought up, quality of demand, this quality of demand concept that's coming out of, the Open Gateway Initiative and Kamara. What about that? Because if you look at the McKinsey graph, the network part of it, right, what they call the network API part, that's the network stuff, right? The network services. And if we look at this graph, you really have to ask the question, well, then what are we looking at here with the bigger numbers here, the 100 billion to 300 billion? If we're only looking at best estimate or most optimistic estimate, $80 billion, that's kind of small, right? But so it really begs the question is, what do we really, and, do you sell APIs? And if the focus is on APIs and standards and there's nothing underneath to actually monetize or create differentiated capability versus whether it's indoor or outdoor or what have you, what do you really have here? And I think that's the big question that is still outstanding, oddly. And when I get into these conversations around the APIs, I'm always scratching my head and wondering what people are talking about. But this it doesn't look like a really kosher picture. And it certainly, doesn't look encouraging.
It's a sales pitch. It's a sales pitch by McKinsey, which is fair enough. I mean, I'm sure they got stuff behind it.
But it has it's beyond it. Well, it's not specific to McKinsey. I'm talking about in general, how everyone talks about this stuff. It is a little bit disconnected from how we really should be talking about it.
So I had several conversations about this, and when I hear people have these conversations about AI, I feel like I've heard this all before. I heard this all before when people were going to monetize network data. Nobody knows what people do better than the carriers, because everybody has their phone with them all the time, and they were going to anonymize that data. There was going to be all kinds of geolocation, information that was going to be interesting to all kinds of enterprises and city planners, and everybody was going to want what the carriers had, and that was going to be a new revenue stream. I feel like that is the same conversation in terms of how are you monetizing the network? Well, it's through your APIs. It's through exposing more of the network to developers. Now it's developers. And people will pay for that because they want to, because they want their apps to do what they already do, because they want slightly better performance. That's where the conversation kind of breaks down. And when I've asked folks about this, I feel like I've heard this before, it's sort of essentially saying, well, we didn't do it. We couldn't get it done the first time. This is a second go at trying to monetize the actual network.
Yeah.
So I think there's, I don't know. I don't know that it's going to go any better.
Kelly,
you're on the
journals. No, you're not supposed to have an opinion on any of this. Just write down the middle facts. All right.
The thing which I really was really struck me is that they were talking about how many operators had signed up for Open Gateway. I think it was 47. No one actually said what's the number of developers that have any relationship with this at all. No one came on and said, "Oh, we've got 170,000 developers," or whatever the number is collectively across those 47. No one said, "Oh, we've had hackathons and we've given out 24,000 t-shirts and ordered 60,000 pizzas for the developers of the hackathons." There's a missing piece of the puzzle here, which is between these APIs and making them consumable and visible to the developer community, helping people do the onboarding, abstracting away any some of the various pain points and the and how you do the API management and how you actually make sure that you don't run up a massive bill. Essentially all the stuff that is now evolved around the cloud APIs. People know how to consume AWS. There's an industry of advisors helping people manage their cloud spend and a bunch of toolkits there, aimed at developers. And I've spoken to a couple of people who're starting to do middleware that lives between these APIs and the actual whether it's industrial developers or a gaming developer or whatever, and reformatting them in a way which that community, or actually multiple sets of those communities, want to consume them. And having a gaming developer is very different to someone selling, to creating the appointment reminder app or the anti-fraud app or the industrial camera and drone app. And there's not enough focus, in my view, on what lives in the middle there. How is that actually presented to those developer communities?
May I say that there is a further complication, because oftentimes you do see the operators in and even the app developers in, but it doesn't necessarily mean that then anybody will actually buy or pay for the stuff, which doesn't mean that it's not useful. Because sometimes you do have things that are useful. And so, for instance, on our phone, the reason why we value our phones is because there are so many things we can do with it. So there is a lot of value there. It's just that you're not operators, whenever the operators try to charge for something, for a specific service, doesn't seem to work. But that doesn't mean that the services are not interesting or valuable. And so the question is, when you look at monetization, we've been talking for forever now, the API is the latest one. But if you look backwards, what were the really successful attempts? And the thing is that actually there are people that make money all the other people, I mean, a lot of service providers are making money. So it's not like there is no money. It's just that operators are not really able to directly monetize the network, but indirectly they are, because that's the reason why we're paid for the subscription. So I think that at some point we have to sort of come to terms that operators might not be the best place to actually charge for sort of an app. And then when you look at the McKinsey kind of data, I've been doing these models in the past, so I can see how you do it. You just look at the world from the API whole, and then everything looks like you can make a lot of money. And that's somewhat true, but it's just because you have very skewed view of how money moves around. And that's where it creates all the problem. You should just have to look at the whole picture. Then you'll say, well, maybe it's not that big of an opportunity.
Right. So why are they all wrong? What's the optimistic view here on network APIs?
I think at the minimum, I would say that this is a shift of the value chain that the operators are trying to do. They try to create, as Dean said, it's a new side of, so it's not the output that they don't try to pay for me to pay more my subscription. They try to have the developer to pay. So which is interesting in a sense, but Dean is absolutely spot on. I want to see operators giving T-shirts in the next dev conference of networks. They must create this with GSMA or whomever, camera, etc., to make it actually happen. In this case, yes, it opens even the door for what Dean and I were discussing before. It opens the door for even Gen AI type of capabilities to B2B. So as we have discussed before. So I think at the minimum, it's a new interesting side of monetization that cannot be compounded in ARPU, but it needs to be proven, as Kelly said, for the second or third time should be right.
Can I just say that this kind of does nudge up against, and maybe kind of goes into the enterprise space completely, and how the carriers are playing there. And I do think that MWC, there was a shift in tone from the carriers, and principally from their enterprise sales division, which are slightly different beasts. And I think they're generally, can I say they're savvier? I mean, the national opcos are good at what they do, but you know what I mean? I think in ways they are, and I keep talking about this kind of team sport thing, and it's like collaboration or co-creation or whatever it is, and I know a lot of it is lip service, but I think they are taking some of the lessons from IoT, and that you have to, to borrow a line, you have to from a certain IoT play, you have to build it together. And I think there is evidence now that some SI style operator enterprise divisions, if you like, are doing that. I think Verizon came across really well at MWC, and I think it is working through system integrators, and I think it is working through the vendors as well, and the developer community, the ISVs, all this kind of stuff. And they are talking, and it is just talk to me, but it sounds kind of convincing. And the good thing is the message that comes across is they are, this talk of a couple of years ago, even 12 months ago, from the operators, like they were going to prime all these deals, that they were going to be the hand to shake. And nobody's doing that anymore. Or at least the serious looking ones are not doing that anymore. Verizon's not doing that anymore. I don't think Vodafone's doing that anymore to an extent. I mean, and so they are going in saying, we are part of we don't even need to captain this. You captain this, Mr. SI or whatever, and you bring the developers together, and we will be at the table with them at those hackathons, handing out those T-shirts, and and we will bring our public network to bear as well. This idea that you need a whole range of spectrum, and in the end, sometimes in their own markets, that will be a difference. You know what I mean? And of course, as with private 5G, there is an argument which says, this is a technology without a use case. But those are, that story is still being told. But I do think as well that those will come. I mean, you've got to believe or not believe. And I think that's the, that's the way I feel about it anyway.
So I think there's an interesting...
I have two pieces of paper that both have topics written on them. Pick left hand or right hand.
right hand.
Private 5G. They both said private 5G. You wrote a piece during MWC titled "Private 5G: Basket Cases, Bloodbaths, and Bitching: A Barroom Sting in Barcelona." So wonderful alliteration. This is a tone poem. I'm going to do a brief dramatic reading from it and then ask you to tell us what the hell you're communicating here. A mobile operator in pinstripes, a radio engineer in a billowing jacket, and a software startup in a fitted suit walk into a Rust Belt dive bar and lay their money down. Except this isn't the whole scene. The operator's nervous, steps back. A venture firm in slacks picks up the tab for his squeeze. There are chancers along the bar and industrialists in the back with sleeves rolled up and pool cues in their hands. Gamblers in lounge suits lean over the balcony, and regulars in plaid shirts hunch forward in their seats. In this long saloon bar snaking through the halls of MWC, one thing is clear. There will be blood. Explain yourself.
So, I mean, I think those are very slight caricatures of different types in this kind of Western saloon bar, you know, this Western town, this Wild West, which is a branch of IoT town or whatever you want to call it. Yeah, I mean, the basket cases are the guys that are walking around the IoT market, kind of looking a little disgruntled. They haven't made more money out of it yet. You know, the lessons from IoT, which I think there are for private 5G. If you think of private 5G as a high power version of IoT, I mean, you know, in simple terms, I mean, the blood baths is just because there's consolidation coming. I think that what we referenced at the beginning, the hype has caught up with the reality, and I think that is a kind of a necessary stage. But I think there's some people who've come into this that sector and bet big on it, and it has not come about as quickly as they hoped. But I think boots on the ground again, I think it is happening. I kind of believe that. I think there is business being done. It's not on the scale that anybody wanted or perhaps predicted initially, but it's developing, and the bitching is just the panic in the you know, among the ranks, and everybody's pointing the finger at everybody else. And that was very clearly, you know, among a lot of the people I spoke to at MWC was what was going on. So, you know, and yeah, the barroom sting in Barcelona is just, it's a dust bowl kind of Western Clint Eastwood scene. Do you know what I mean? There's going to be, you know, there's going to be casualties.
All right. So who are the going to be? Who's got some perspective here? I mean, I think monetarily, private networks indisputably have not provided the lift that was projected, and I think right around MWC we saw a lot of revisions to market kind of addressable market. But you know, what's the problem, Leonard? If I think James is right, there are some lessons to learn from IoT. So,
well, yeah, I mean, I think one of the problems has been to a degree this notion that you know, private 5G has to be as easy as Wi-Fi, and you know, the question is, well, then, you know, what kind of differentiation is a 5G network bringing to a, let's say, a shop floor or warehouse or what have you? And is that necessarily what people expected in terms of the capabilities that 5G would bring to the table? But, you know, we're seeing some encouraging things, though. Okay. You know, for one, you know, the densification of core and baseband. I mean, we've seen a bunch of examples of vendors out there that have been able to put an entire network onto a single rack unit. We're also starting to see time-sensitive networking being introduced to a lot of solutions. And then maybe eventually we'll start to see comp and more advanced, let's say, high reliability architectures and deployment models being supported. But all these things, I mean, they're not cheap. And so they don't make things as easy as Wi-Fi. And maybe that's the reason why, you know, private 5G really hasn't been able to sell itself on any kind of differentiation beyond what, in most instances, Wi-Fi can provide. And everyone has to remember, Wi-Fi continues to evolve and advance, right? In fact, taking a lot of technologies and methods from cellular to make connectivity more robust, multi-user, and lower latency. And so, these are all things that I think the private 5G or private cellular folks are going to have to reckon with. And maybe something good will come out at the end of that reckoning, right? But I don't think you're going to see 5G as easy as Wi-Fi. And again, you have to settle on the fact that that's just going to be the case, and be okay with it. Maybe charge a hell of a lot more.
We got like 9 minutes left here. Is everybody okay if we just sort of devolve into rapid fire round here? Yeah,
sure. One very quick 30-second. I would say. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Monica.
Monica, then Dean. Yeah.
Very, very quick thing is China, for instance, is like shows you how private 5G could actually work. So I think that's where I learn. I mean, every year. You go there, you learn what's happening there. I think it's inspiring. It's not a model that would duplicate, but there is a sense that there is a way, there is a possibility.
Yeah.
Did they show us how private 5G can work, or they show us how centralized planning can work?
Exactly. I'm not saying we should get that model, but from a technology point of view, it could work.
I'd say there's also how forecasting can work or not work. I mean, we've had private cellular networks for over 20 years. I saw my first private GSM small cell in 2001. And looking at this from a UK lens, it looks like the US suddenly got ahead of itself with a hype around CBRS. And you had this massive spike about 3 years ago, whereas I've been seeing a slow evolution of private networks in the UK for 15 years. Heathrow Airport had a private LTE network in 2015, I think it was, and there's been oil and gas and military and energy facilities with private networks since, long before that. And obviously there's been a bit of a bump in hype recently, but I definitely see that the hype curve was much sharper up and then down again in North America, well, US specifically, than it was elsewhere. So I think that we're sort of normalizing that now and realizing that, first off, the main uses of private networks are industrial, outdoor, mission critical type things, which are going to be expensive, and where frankly the competition isn't Wi-Fi, it's things like Tetra and P25 and other outdoor wireless networks. And I think that we're now getting to this era where some of this sort of indoor carpeted office Wi-Fi type environments, maybe retail and others, are being considered. But actually there, I think maybe the killer app might be neutral host, but I'm not sure how rapidly that can scale, particularly because there simply aren't the number of cellular engineers that there are Wi-Fi engineers. There's probably 3 zeros of difference in terms of who can string a Wi-Fi network around versus who can put a cellular network around. And we're not going to might have a 10x improvement, not 100x or 1000x.
Here's a good one from the audience for you, Philippe. What happened to millimeter wave? Short to the point question.
quick one on that. Yeah, if you want to fire. Yeah, actually, indoor coverage was that Dean mentioned is a good topic. I think things are coming in China. We had the launch on the ZTE booth of the entertainment park, indoor entertainment park in a big logistics center, a former logistics center in the outskirts of Beijing, where they found the limit of number of concurrent XR gamers concurrently playing with the entertainment game, and it was around beyond 20 concurrent users. They had issues by using mid-band 5G, so they were looking at potentially going to 60 users using millimeter wave. So as Monica said, let's have a look at what China is doing this year. As we know, millimeter wave was was seen by China as more as a US technology, so maybe the hindrance So let's see how it evolves this year. And of course, India embraced it for fixed wireless access if we find the right cost point. So I think it will be the two things to look at this year.
It's just an aside for the audience, but I think some of the most interesting things I saw at MWC were on Qualcomm's stand, and it was the foundational R&D for 6G, particularly Giga MIMO. I thought was fascinating to see just how far along you are with that work, and then just the spectrum pipeline for, you know, the upper mid band as a coverage layer in the 2030 timeline. Dean, yes?
Yeah, spectrum pipeline. I'm starting to think that metaphor needs to change to sort of sprinkler system and like precision agriculture approach to water rather than hosing spectrum bands for exclusive use. But that's a discussion for another day.
Yeah, so maybe we can just go around the table here. Some final thoughts. I don't really care what they're about. Just maybe, you know, what you thought about the overall news from MWC, and maybe one item that you think is highly relevant for the audience here. Leonard, start with you. You're on mute, I believe. You're definitely on mute.
Sorry about that. For next year, one of the things I suggest to GSMA, call it modernization first, because all these aspirational things, they don't happen until we start to solve the operators' problems, whether they're the incumbent, traditional, what have you, or the new generation that's up and coming. So,
Kelly?
NTN.
Yeah.
Of sort of thoughts about what ubiquitous coverage might actually look like. I think some folks very, you know, some really interesting partnerships being struck, you know, and I'm actually at the satellite show in DC this week, so keep up with things on RCR and more on that.
All right, Monica?
Analog. I think that what you really learn is that the value, when you go to Mobile Congress, the value is to actually see people and just go beyond the shiny objects out there. Then it's really valuable and it's really fun. And so I don't care if people talk about Gen AI or whatever, you know, just seeing people is really what matters and what I look forward to the next year. However, there are two favorite technologies of mine that actually were hardly ever mentioned this year. It's RIS for passive transmission and sensing. I really think it's a great stuff. Definitely no hype on that. So I hope for hype to come next year. It won't happen, but I still hope.
Reconfigurable intelligent surfaces. There was some stuff in the Qualcomm stand around that. All right, Fili, final.
I don't know.
Yeah, beyond the RIS that we understand and the higher mid-band Giga MIMO, I would say, yeah, on-device AI, we will move from a world of training models to a world of inference. We are going to play more and more as a business people and as consumers. So I think that this balance that will be struck between on-device AI and cloud AI will be and the way the telcos can take advantage of it in the middle with a robust 5G network will be interesting to see.
James?
Yeah, I don't know if I've got any last thoughts really. I mean, I just think that from a journalistic point of view, it's a fun time to write about this market. You know, I think MWC was a fun show, and the conversations are good. And I think, you know, I mean, obviously I do write about the private 5G market quite a lot, and so I do go on about it and the IoT space. But I think they're really good. I think there's good people in it, good technologies, clever stuff going on. I just don't think there's much money being made, but I think it's going to be a 2024 is going to be some good stories. So, you know, stick with us.
Dean, bring it home.
Okay. First off, I hope next year there's much less hype about edge compute, which I think was overstated this time around. What I do think next time I'd also like to see more of is more focus on indoor wireless of all varieties, more focus on wholesale models, again, of all varieties or neutral host, and also perhaps maybe have some more sensible discussions around regulation and policy that aren't basically straw man arguments about cloud companies and tech companies versus telcos.
All right, we're at time, everybody. Thank you so much for joining today and for sharing your thoughts. I enjoyed the conversation. Hope our audience did. They seem engaged. And Philippe, thank you for coming on as a special guest. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much for the surprise invitation. Thank you, guys.
All right. Cheers, everyone. Have a good day.
All right. Take care.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.